And of course, you heard my excitement. I was just feeding off the excitement of those who were saying, Sherwood is in the country. And he is, of course, the SABC's UN and, of course, US correspondent. So he wears those hats, but we'll unpack that in greater detail. But Sherwood, always great to have you back home.
Sakina, nice to be in studio with you, and nice to be in South Africa with all the people that watch us every day.
And of course, we want to talk about Trump, but before we get to the US issues, let's start with the DRC, because there's so much I want to unpack with you. So we have seen the provisional election results being declared now, but what is the UN's view on what's happening in the DRC?
Well, I think if we were to be fair about this, I think we could certainly state that this was a controversial election, whether you talk about the controversy around using the electronic machines. Of course, the first time this was introduced into electoral politics in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but also the disenfranchisement of people in the East. So there's a lot of controversy, and I imagine you're going to hear more of that in the days ahead, particularly if opposition candidates do protest these elections through the courts. We have seen now a statement issued at 11 p.m. Eastern Time in New York by the UN Secretary General, basically noting the results, calling for calm, and urging disputes to follow a process. So I think that's all you can really expect from the Secretary General as those opposition candidates, as I pointed out, make those decisions. Of course, critically, tomorrow, Friday, in the UN Security Council, there is a meeting scheduled to discuss the developments now over the next few days. You know that South Africa now has taken up its seat in the Security Council. They are the leading SADC country there. The DRC, of course, a SADC country. So let's see how South Africa leads on this issue, particularly as the rest of the world now coalesces certainly around what SADC wants to do in the days ahead.
And speaking about the disenfranchisement of the eastern part of that country in particular, how does this impact on the integrity, from your perspective, of this particular election?
Well, the question we have to ask is, will those votes make an impact on the final results? I think Felix Tshisekedi got about 38% of the vote. So it's a question about whether the candidate that came second would be able to catch those numbers if those 1 million votes, 75%, for example, went to them. Who knows? I mean, this was certainly a momentous decision by the Electoral Commission to say we cannot ensure the safety, we cannot ensure the safety of voters, and particularly the armed forces and UN peacekeepers that are there trying to create a system of order, which is what you need when you tackle an Ebola outbreak. Remember, people can't come into contact with each other. It needs to be a process. There's a quarantine period. People are very concerned about the burial of bodies and don't like people telling them how to bury their dead. So this was a very big, difficult decision for the ENI to make. Let's see what the Security Council says tomorrow.
Indeed, we will. I want to come to matters regarding the United States. Day 19 of that government shutdown now. At least they will come into it a couple of hours. But, looking at what's happening there, Trump appointing, 19 new attorneys. What's going on?
Well, the government shutdown is we are heading into uncharted territory here, right? If this shutdown continues until Saturday, this will have been the 22nd day and the longest in the history of the United States. And what you have are two sides that are intransigent around the building of this wall that Mexico was supposed to pay for. Donald Trump is seeking $5.7 billion in funding now from the United States Congress, which is now led by Nancy Pelosi, who is a Democrat. So there's a new sheriff in town, and Donald Trump has to negotiate with the sheriff. And she is saying that a wall is an immoral emblem that does not represent the values of the United States. Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, said that we want the symbol of the United States to continue to be the Statue of Liberty, Lady Liberty, rather than a wall. They call it an archaic process, and that they want to invest more in technology in terms of securing the border. Trump wants a wall. This was an electoral issue. He believes it's what got him elected. And so you see the standoff. Of course, they met yesterday. Trump met with the top Democrats and Republicans in Congress and walked out of the meeting, apparently, according to reports, slamming his hands on the desk and saying, bye-bye. So this is where we are. It's a stalemate. We're in uncharted territory. But the main issue here is the 800,000 federal workers that are not going to get a paycheck, museums that are not functioning as they should, national parks that are not open because of the shutdown. And eventually, you have to move away from politics and to legislating what these 800,000 federal workers need. And they need paychecks. They have bills to pay. They have mortgages to pay. These are people that depend on their salaries, and they're not going to get paid tomorrow.
And I have to ask you, quite away from all the serious stuff, but still somewhat serious, your role as UN Correspondents Association President, and, what does that entail? And, of course, just green with envy.
Well, thank goodness it came to an end, Sakina, because it felt like I had two jobs. One I was being paid for and the other one not. Look, it was a privilege. It was the first time an African was appointed from sub-Saharan Africa. I think the SABC, by virtue of my appointment, has really received a platform and recognition that perhaps wasn't there in the past. I think it's fair to say that the SABC, like CNN and Al Jazeera and all the other big broadcasters, is one of the big guys now at the United Nations. You will get calls from officials saying, can we speak to SABC? The SG's office often contacts us and says he wants to talk to an African broadcaster, and we thought we'd call on you. So from that perspective, I think it's been wonderful. Our role was really to represent the diversity of the 260 members of the International Press Corps that covers the United Nations, right? So from the Middle East, from Asia, from around the world, Latin America. And one of our main goals yearly is the planning of the annual UN Correspondents Association Gala. We give awards to journalists that cover the United Nations in various categories, online, print, focused on climate change, the real issues that actually matter in the world today. And so, I get to put on a tux. Well, I certainly did. We're showing some pictures now. That was Adrian Grenier, who was our advocate of the year. He is a goodwill ambassador for the UN Environment Program, and he works in removing plastics through his foundation from the ocean. That's me talking there, addressing the Secretary General and diplomats and everyone in their black tie, the advocate of the year. And I think we have some pictures of that. The citizen of the year, I beg your pardon, was Amal Clooney. And of course, Amal Clooney brought along her husband, George Clooney. George brought his parents along, and I'll tell you this. They are warm, they are wonderful, they are engaging, they were interested in who you were. And at one point, George leans over to me, and I know I'm saying it like we're buddies, right? George leans over to me because we're sitting at the head table, and he says, I've got to talk to you about these galas, right? It's very difficult to have people speaking while there's food being served and alcohol being served. It gets a little noisy. Let me tell you how they do it at the Golden Globes. And I thought, wow, George Clooney's telling me about the Golden Globes. How cool is that?
You know what? Am I green right now? Okay, let me leave it there. Sherwin, always a pleasure having you. And never enough time to get through all of that, but really enjoyed having Sherwin Bryce-Pease back home. And of course, I'm sure we'll talk to him more about some of the developments at the moment. But with that, it's time for a last break before we say goodbye.